All right, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Here we are. And let's kind of get set up here. I'm disorganized today. All right. Like I said, Shabbat Shalom. And it's nice and warm down here in Mississippi. And so I hope it's nice and warm wherever you are in a good way. And what I'd like to do today again is just basically use the uh, newsletter as our jumping off place, because what I intended to do with the newsletter is not exactly what came out in the newsletter. Had to take a different direction that I was really planning to, which that can turn out to be a good thing sometimes. If somebody needs to hear something different, and if the spirit wants to change the direction a little bit, then we'll do that. I didn't start out working on the newsletter yesterday morning intending to write about working in a prison. Not really something that comes up in everyday conversation once you're retired, but nevertheless, here we are. So that's what we will do today. So let's. So, I think most of you know that Alan and I did work for the Federal Bureau of Prisons and ended up retiring. I retired 10 years ago. Yeah, just a little bit over 10 years ago, May of 2015. And of course, he retired before I did, but he went back to work for the sheriff's department after he retired. So it's past history, but when you work for when you work in a particular occupation for that long, of course, it affects you. It does have its moments, never a dull moment, that's for sure. And so as I was thinking about what I wanted to present as the lesson for the newsletter this week, and which the newsletter usually migrates into the live stream, I got to thinking of something because I'm also thinking forward a little bit to the Revive conference and what I wanted to present there, because the theme is where heaven meets earth, which is an awesome thing, where heaven meets earth. And so I was kind of thinking back through this little mini series we've done about walking on water. And I thought, well, that's exactly what this little series has been about, is when we walk on water, or when we walk through the water, especially, we are in that place where heaven does meet earth. And we get a little foretaste of what not just the millennium is going to be like, but a little taste of eternity as well. And so I started, just pulled up a blank text document, and this is what came out. So if it's horrible, forgive me. And if it helps in some way, then Baruch Hashem. There's a point to telling stories sometimes. And so this just started out telling a little story because I was thinking of what a Sallyport is. And I was actually just going to start kind of run off and jump off in there in terms of describing the way a believer walks is kind of being in a Sallyport. Not quite in heaven, but definitely not completely grounded in the earth either, because, we are spiritual beings as well as physical beings. And then I thought, well, there's probably a lot of people who have never been in a Sallyport, much less know what the word Sallyport means. And that was an everyday word that we used. And so I was thinking of, how many probably hours of my life I have spent in the Sallyport. Not that that's a bad thing. You never wanted to make the control room officer angry because you would definitely get some time out in the Sallyport if you banged on the window or anything to get their attention, because they were very busy. They were watching things going on all over the institution. They weren't necessarily too concerned about whether you made it to work on time. And so you had to kind of walk a fine line there. But once you got into that Sallyport for the very first time, it was a funny feeling. It really is a funny feeling. And because those steel doors are huge and heavy, they're extremely heavy, and you have no control over them. It's not like you have a little key you can use to open the door or even let yourself out. It's completely controlled by someone else. And so you're at their mercy, so to speak. But a Sallyport is basically an area that's neither in nor out. The closest thing I could describe it as in everyday life would maybe be a revolving door. The only problem is it doesn't keep moving. It's like you have to go in, that door has to close behind you, so you can't go back. But nevertheless, the door in front of you is not open either. That's also controlled by someone else. And that's a security thing. If, you're trying to bust your way into a prison, which I don't know that I've ever heard of, it would stop you right there. And if you were trying to bust your way out, of course, it's another way of stopping you right there as well. But neither of those doors is under your control. They're going to open when they open by some other party who's watching you, making sure you are who you're supposed to be. And you're not under duress. That's something else that they're looking at. Do you look like you're under duress? Do you look like something else is going on? Especially coming out, is it possible you're actually a hostage? Are you giving off weird signals? And so, yeah, there's somebody scrutinizing everybody coming in and going out. And so, yeah, you have to park it in that Sallyport at least until the door behind you is secure, and only then will the door in front of you secure, whether you're going in or out. And if you've never been in, if you've only been through a revolving door, then you don't really know what it feels like when all of a sudden you're stuck between two solid metal doors with no way of opening either of them. Maybe if a revolving door has ever quit on you and all of a sudden you were stuck inside, that might give you the idea. If you've ever been stuck on an elevator and the door wouldn't open, you might get a little bit of an idea of what it feels like to be in a Sallyport. But it's a necessary security feature in any prison. And so I was thinking through the years, when we did have a visitor to our department, or sometimes just to the institution itself, sometimes you could be called on to escort this visitor in for a particular reason. And because my office was in the library, I was often called upon to escort the copy machine repairman up to the inmate library because it was something that broke down frequently. They used it like it was crazy how many copies they could make. And so it did break down frequently. And so sometimes you would get a new repairman. The one that usually came, he was used to it. It didn't seem to bother him too much to go inside and to do the work that he had to do and then come on back out. But when you would get a new one every now and then, or you would get one that wasn't really his normal route that he was on, they could be pretty big-eyed by the time you got down there to pick them up and to walk them back inside the institution to do the work they needed to do. Because once you come into the lobby, especially if they have tools for repair or replacement parts, everything they're going to take inside has to be inventoried. And once they realize that, a lot of them would just take a few tools out and then take the rest of it back to their car. It wasn't worth like oh my goodness, if you're going to inventory everything, let me just take what I'm pretty sure I'm going to use. So every tool they had to be inventoried. They went through the metal detector. They had to fill out paperwork for the front lobby officer. They had to show their ID. There had to be something that was on file that we had sent down that said, this is the person that's going to be coming in. This is the company he's with. He'll be here at such and such time. And everything had to match up there. You know, if it hadn't been approved ahead of time by the captain, then they weren't coming in. Or if we were having issues inside, if we were having one of those days, then visitors weren't coming in at all. You wouldn't bring them into that environment. And so even on a normal day, it could be intimidating because they've been down there usually 20 minutes before I make it across the compound to come down there. And maybe they've been listening to the radio because the front lobby officer has a radio and they could hear all this jargon. And if they don't know what that jargon means, then there again, you're listening to something in a different language. You don't know exactly what they're talking about. And in that front lobby, especially, it had super high ceilings because you actually had to walk up flights of stairs to get up to the main compound. And so the sound down there would just echo. And it just made everything the more intimidating if you had never been there before, or maybe if you'd never even been to a prison before. And so we finally get him processed in, and we walk up all these steps. And if you weren't in shape, it wasn't that easy. Have to stop up here, surrender ID, of course, to the control room officer. He's scrutinizing, again, the person coming in. Is this the right picture? Is this the right person? Is this signed off on by the captain? Checking him out to see what he's got. Looking at the person escorting him. Do I look like I'm under duress with this person? They're checking everything before they ever get to the Sallyport. And if that stuff looks okay, then they're going to let him in. And so I, as the staff member, of course, I would go to that big door. It had these huge brass handles on it, and just wait for him to buzz us in. And the door was heavy enough, I have kind of lean on it to push it open. And I would open that door and have him go on inside, then I would come in behind him. And we just got used to letting the door slam behind us because that way we could be sure it was secure. Sometimes if you let a door slam, that's how you know it's shut, because that other door won't open if this one isn't secure. And when he hears that door shut behind him, if he doesn't already have big sweat circles under his arms, it's starting. You could see him literally break out in a sweat. Sometimes their eyes would get real big. And he would look up at, it's a chipboard, CHIT, where we've got these little round brass things with our names on them. And we hang them. We flip them over to show that we're inside the institution. Very low tech, but that's how, once you go inside the compound, you would flip your chit over. And that says, if something goes seriously wrong today, then I'm out there in the smoke somewhere, come get me. And so it's just an accountability thing. And sometimes they would ask, like, what is that? And I would tell them. That didn't help their situation at all. Like the fact that we would need accountability to know who to come get if things went wrong. And but finally that second door would buzz open and I'd push it out, and they would always just kind of pause, like, do I really want to go out there? Because when they would look at me as like their staff escort, it didn't really matter. I mean, I might have 5 pounds of equipment on my duty belt, but I'm not carrying a weapon. Because inside the fence, you don't carry your AR-15, or which we had M16s, I have an AR-15. You don't carry your 9mm. You don't carry a shotgun inside unless something, again, has gone seriously wrong. And so what you use inside the fence, because you don't want someone taking a weapon away from you and using it on you, You use your head, you use your wits to keep yourself safe and to keep other people safe. And when they would look at me, they were like, you're the one that's supposed to be keeping me safe inside of there? I'm like, yeah, I'm it. You're it, buddy, aren't you? It'll be okay. Just do what I tell you to do, okay? And if something starts going wrong, I'll get you out of here as fast as I can. And so he would walk on out. And like I say, we always let that door slam because that way we know it's shut. And I would let that door slam behind us. And you could just see, oh my, especially if there were, 800 inmates out on the compound walking around. He's like, and we're walking all the way through there to get where we're going. I'm like, yeah, we're way over there. It was a scary thing for them, and I don't blame them. I mean, first time you go into a prison, you don't know what's going to happen. All you know is what you saw on TV. And it was amazing how fast they could repair that copy machine if there were inmates in the library while they were working. Because my job is, of course, I have to watch his tools to make sure they don't walk off. I have to make sure the inmates aren't bothering him, which most of them wouldn't, which most of them would like, if they could, they'd quiz him to figure out how they could make the thing work for free. And a few of them did figure that one out. If they can hotwire a card, I do guarantee you they can figure out how to make a copy machine spit out free copies. But I was to make sure they weren't bothering him while he was working, make sure his tools didn't wander off. And then make sure I got him safely back to the front lobby. And man, could they fix those copy machines fast. It was amazing the difference between when I had worked in an office on the outside, how long it would take them to kind of draw out a call on a repair versus, if you've got 30 or 40 inmates watching you, apparently you work much faster. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. But I thought, okay, what's the point of this story? Well, the point of the story was the Sallyport. A Sallyport is a place where you're not exactly in, but you're not exactly out. And that's what I wanted to help people understand about our position as we prepare to enter the kingdom. It's kind of like this prison. You can't just decide you're going to enter the kingdom of heaven. You can't just walk into a secure space. A lot of things have to fall in place before you are able to make that transition between the world out here and the world inside of there. And here's what I would know about that repairman, because, every new person, no matter which prison you start to work at, well, I guess if you started working at a camp, it wouldn't be that intimidating, but for a medium high penitentiary security level institution, we're all going to have the same kind of weird reaction to that the first time we go in. But what I knew is if he had to come in here every day and work, like if his actual job was inside this fence, he'd be very familiar with it. He wouldn't have that first time wide-eyed, where in the world are you taking me? He would, if he were working there full time, he would have been qualified, first of all, by education or work experience. He would have been tested to make sure he was physically fit to do the job. He would have been selected after the proper vetting. He would have gone to intensive training in Glencoe, Georgia. He would hold law enforcement credentials. And he would be very comfortable doing the exact same things. He would be very comfortable going in and out of that Sallyport to go to whatever his assigned department was to work, because he would have the training. to do that job. He wouldn't be fresh off the street. He would have undergone, even before his first day there, he would have had training that pertained to what he was about to do. And let's say he was assigned to custody. Well, eventually, this intimidating compound full of dangerous people, he'd learn to run that compound. He would literally run that compound. He would be the compound officer out there deciding when we were going to have these control moves, when they were going to eat, how, what rotations they were going to eat. If he saw trouble developing, he would manage that information with the lieutenants, with the control room officer. He would learn how to do all that. He would even learn to kind of sniff out trouble, even that other people might not see if they didn't work there all the time. He would see little things that would, hey, wait a minute, this is off. He might work a post like the control room where he would control the gates. He would literally decide who could or couldn't come into that secure perimeter. He would be deciding who got into the Sallyport. He might be out there in a truck driving around the perimeter with an M16, a shotgun, a 9mm. He would understand every bit of that radio communication because he would have acquired a new vocabulary. In his training, he would learn for every post he was assigned to, he would learn the rules, he would learn the codes that governed how he ran that post. He might come to my self-defense class, which they hated. They had to requalify once a year with firearms, CPR, and then, of course, self-defense. But he would have had that training that made him very comfortable doing that job. In other words, he would learn how to go out and to come in the Sallyport. He would become proficient at it. He would be comfortable with what he needed to do. And, even part of the qualification for the job is the Office of Personnel Management. They do background investigations. And they do more than just check your old job references and educational references. They literally go to your neighborhood and talk to your neighbors just to make sure you don't have a weird streak. And, which that's kind of funny because most people that work in a prison do have a weird streak. But, there's acceptable weird streaks and unacceptable weird streaks. But he would have passed all this in terms of preparation and training. And he would be just fine going out, coming in that Sallyport. And this expression to go out and to come in, that's an important expression to understand in scripture. So I went to Numbers 27, and then verses 17 and 21 give an example of Moses talking about being the one to go out and come in, and then passing off this responsibility to Yehoshua, so that he would be able to do that job of going out and coming in. And so Moses says, who will go out and come in before them, and who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like sheep which have no shepherd. Right? Notice in that context, going out and coming in is related to a congregation. A congregation, an assembly of people needs someone who can go out and come in before them, who have leadership skills. And so that was the question, like, who's going to do this when I'm gone? So the choice was Yehoshua. It says, moreover, he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his command, they shall go out, and at his command, they shall come in, both he and the sons of Israel with him, even all the congregation. So there's a heavy emphasis when you go out and when you come in on it being a service to the congregation, to the assembly of Israel. There is a Sallyport. And that Sallyport functions as this secure place, like a gate. And gates have to be supervised. That's why the judges, the elders would often meet in the city gates. And even if they didn't literally meet in the gates, which they often did, it was still referred to as in the gates, that there would be judgment within the gates. There has to be, just like that control room officer, he has to look at who's trying to come in or who's trying to go out and decide whether they do or whether they don't. Because there's an assembly of persons inside of that fence, but there's also a congregation outside the fence. And you have to keep these two congregations separate. That's your job when you work at a prison, is to keep the community safe. And as well, to keep the inmates safe from one another. So as we've looked in this series about walking on water, when we look at how the Reed Sea functioned as a kind of a water tunnel, it became a national immersion. And that, an immersion, a baptism, it's called a mikvah. And this mikvah is symbolic of how your old nature is dissolved when you go under the water. And then when you come up out of the water, you emerge a new creature. You're like a newborn. When it's done properly, you don't actually do a mikvah with your clothes on. It's kind of like it revisits the way that you came into the world. Now, I'm not advising that. If you have a community immersion, then please, by all means, do like the Israelites and keep your clothes on. But if you have access to a private mikvah, that might be something to think about, that this is the picture. When you come up out of the water, you're a new creature. And this water tunnel, it's like a Sallyport. And in some cases, if it's an individual immersion, it'll function that way. But it can also function like it did for the Israelites, like a national immersion. But in this Sallyport, in this water tunnel, it's like this little in-between place between heaven and earth. And what they find is that as they come out of this national immersion, that they have been immersed into the cloud, and they've been immersed into Moses. And Moses is a metaphor for the Torah, by the way. And as they come up, they should have a nature that is regenerated. It's been regenerated by the spiritual realm. And the water, often represents the spirit, because it's not something you can really contain. It's constantly moving. So after they emerged from the Reed Sea in this wilderness journey, the Israelites kind of stayed in that Sallyport. Even though that was a unique experience, what we realize in this walk in the wilderness is that they're not quite in heaven, but they're not completely on earth either. They have heavenly food. They have heavenly water. Their garments don't wear out. Their shoes don't wear out. The presence of Adonai dwells in the Mishkan when they camp. It leads them in the cloud. You have the voice of Elohim speaking between the two cherubim, just like it did in the garden. So unless they were sinning, actively sinning, complaining, not walking in a way that is really, they're not really qualified to go into the Sallyport. Once they start that business, it's like, no, you can't take that business into the heavenly places. And so you were in the Sallyport. You were kind of half in, half out. I'm going to put you back out here. You're not authorized to go in. And so that's when you see them kind of struck down. That's when you see them subject to Amalek. That's when you see the serpents able to bite them. That's when their enemies prevail, when they're not exhibiting the behaviors that tell the control room officer, so to speak, that I am able to conduct myself on the other side of this door. And the sages said that had it not been for this little golden calf incident and the evil spy incident, theoretically, after this experience at Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah, they said, we will do and we will hear, they're 100% on board. They're really liking being in the Sallyport here, in this preparatory place to crossing into the land. That had they maintained that, they could have ascended to immortality when they crossed the Jordan. When they crossed into the land, that would have been possible because what they saw in the land was still in the realm of the supernatural, like the giants and the incredible fruits and so forth. They saw things that you wouldn't see in the normal earth. And so the journey would for them have been like a Sallyport. And had they continued that preparation, they're going out and they're coming in after that, they would have been like that full-time staff member, fully qualified to do whatever the warden assigned them to do. And let's just say that the warden here is Yeshua. It's his kingdom, and he is going to administer his kingdom. And there will be people who will assist him in administrating his kingdom. And part of their job will be preparing the nations to ascend to the holy city to worship as visitors. Right? Just like this poor little repairman, when he goes in, he's got a visitor badge on. It's just definitely, you can tell a visitor. You just look at his little badge and you're like, okay, this guy doesn't work here. We got to keep an eye on him. We got to look out for him. But preparing the nations to go up means that you have some qualifications, that you're a full-time employee of the kingdom. You're a full-time servant of the kingdom. You've been through the training. You've been through the preparation. You've done the on-the-job training. You know how to go out and how to come in. And therefore, you're qualified to escort visitors in to do what they need to do. Now, in the millennium, Zechariah 14:16 says, then it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to celebrate the feast of Sukkot. So even though there will be those resurrected from the dead, who are those full-time servants of Yeshua, and he says, they will go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. In other words, here's your citizenship. Jerusalem is your citizenship. And you'll even have the new name of the Holy One on you. And it says you will go no more out in terms of what I think Yeshua is trying to explain to us when he talks about the highways and the hedges. You will go no more. You're not coming in as a visitor. When you go up to celebrate the Feast of Sukkot and Zechariah, it's because for some reason you were not qualified to be promoted to citizenship. You had not become a full-time employee of the kingdom in your preparatory life. You have not entered into the education. You had not been vetted. You had not been selected. And of course, we know that it begins with salvation in Yeshua. But then there is, salvation is a gate unto itself, but then you have to start walking in that salvation. You start preparing to serve in the kingdom, not to be served in the kingdom, but to serve in the kingdom. And so there's going to be a lot of people out there who didn't make it in. Doesn't mean at this point, now that they know who the winner is, they won't have a change of heart and want to come up to Jerusalem at the feasts. They will want to come up to Jerusalem at the feasts. So Yeshua told this parable in Luke 14:23. I'm going to read just a section of it. And then Matthew 22, and I would just read the whole context of it in Matthew 22 because it gives you a broader picture. But here's what he says. The master said to the servant, go out, right? Go out into the highways. The servant serves the master in his house, in his kingdom. He serves him. So he says, okay, I want you to go out. He doesn't mean I want you to go out permanently and never come back in. He means I want you to go out and come back in. And he says, go out into the highways and along the hedges and compel them to come in so that my house may be filled. Right? That's why I wanted you to go ahead and check out Matthew chapter 22, because you get the impression contextually, he's talking about a big dinner, a big wedding feast. And we know Sukkot represents that great wedding feast of the bride of Messiah. And you say, well, I think I'd rather be the bride than to be the servant. The answer there is yes. Yeshua tells parables from many different perspectives, and the believer will take on many different roles to help you understand how to approach in multiple ways as a servant, as a bride, maybe as an overseer. And so the servant is going to say, go out, bring them in. And of course, you know that a lot of them had excuses as to why they couldn't come in for the wedding feast. But he says, you know what, even if they weren't the first ones on the invitation list, go find them. If they're willing to come to my feast, and that's kind of the sense of what he's describing here, is that in the millennial kingdom, there will be people who didn't prepare for his arrival to be king, but now that he is the king, they say, oh, you know, I really didn't make it. I wasn't in the first resurrection, but they are left alive. You know, they're traumatized, but they're still on this earth. He said, compel them to come in. Let them come in. They're still welcome in my house. I want my house full. Just because they didn't make the first resurrection doesn't mean I don't have a plan for their lives. Bring them in here for this big dinner so they can enjoy Sukkot. And if we can remember that for Messiah, the big thing about the temple was that it was a house of prayer for all nations. He wants all nations to come in and to be part of the wedding feast every year. He actually wants them to become his servants in this house of prayer for all nations. He wants them to help disciple new ones so that the house will be full. But in this parable, you're only really seeing Israel that's fully at home and employed to administer this plan year round. And they are able to go out and to come in this merged spiritual realm of Upper Jerusalem and then the natural purified earth of Jerusalem. And we've talked about how holy Jerusalem is in the millennium, like even the bells of the horses will say holy. The everyday eating dishes of Jerusalemites in the kingdom will be just as holy as the vessels in the temple. And so that's why they need assistance. If we're going to bring them into the house of prayer for all nations, they're coming into an especially secure, holy place. And we need to make sure that we're there to escort them, prepare them. You know what the requirements are if you're going to stand in this holy place. We want you to enjoy Sukkot, but we don't want you dragging sin in here, uncleanness, and all the things that have to be outside. We want to teach you how to leave those things outside so that you can come in and enjoy this wedding feast. Because at this point, they can't go out and come in at will. They're not full-time employees, so to speak. So those who are these full-time employees, these full-time servants, they can teach, they can prepare, They can vet those who are out here in the highways and the byways of the nations and say, come up at the feast, come visit at Sukkot. And they can instruct them so that these visitors are properly dressed in a garment of salvation. And as they try to come through the Sallyport, we can make sure that they're not carrying anything on them that is against the codes. That's why we have to learn Torah. That's why we have to be trained. We have to teach them what is clean and what is unclean, because he wants them in this holy city. He doesn't want them outside there. He wants them in his house of prayer. He wants them at the feast, but we have to make sure they understand what a clean garment is. And so these servants, these full-time employees, they're like these officers who are managing the Sallyport, and that's for the safety and the security of everyone. You don't want to drag unclean things into a pure holy place to contaminate what's there. Neither do you want the person who's trying to drag it in there to suffer the consequences of doing so. You know, the spirit has a thing that's just like, it'll break out on you, like Nadav and Abihu. Like, it knows things we can't even see. And so here's an example of what I'm talking about. And this is from the Matthew account, Matthew 22, and this is verses 12 through 14. It says, but when the king came in to look over the dinner guests, he saw a man there who was not dressed in wedding clothes. And he said to him, friend, how did you come in here without wedding clothes? And the man was speechless. He had no defense. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is why we want to prepare them. If we go out in the highways and byways and bring them in, we have to instruct them in holiness. They cannot believe that the sin that they live in is proper dress to bring into the holy city. We have to secure that Sallyport. And so this is where the kind of the water imagery comes into play, of how we go down into the water of immersion and then we come up like a newborn. They're going to need an experience with Yeshua. They're going to need to be immersed into him and his word. And when they're immersed in his word, there's a purifying factor there. That's why, even though they had mikvaot kind of outside the cities, like on the major highways going into Jerusalem, or like you didn't wait till you got into the city so you wouldn't have to fight the crowds to do your mikvah before you went to the temple. They would, if they mikvah too far out, they would have to maintain that purity all the way till they got there. And so there was some advantages, like get ahead of the crowd, and disadvantages, like what if I touch something impure between here and there? And so the immersion, they had tons of mikvaot once you got into the holy city, so that as you came up as that newborn, that you could maintain that purity, that ritual purity, until your feet got into the temple. If only we had that much consciousness of sin right now. But Matthew 18, 1 through 4 explains something that the sages actually say. The sages say that the righteous, when they enter into the kingdom, when they enter into the garden, they'll go through 4 stages of growth, starting with their childhood. And then they'll be a young person, then a mature adult, and then you'll have old age. But in each of these stages, you'll have none of the downside. Like with the old, like we won't have arthritis and that sort of stuff to deal with. You'll simply enjoy the good things that come with that stage of life. But everybody has to go in as a little child, is the underpinning of that. And as part of illustrating it, they say when you enter the garden, there are 7 prophetesses there who will instruct you. And it goes back to your first instruction is from your mother. And of course, the mother is like a symbol of the Holy Spirit. Before you get into the technicalities that your father's discipline will teach you, your first purities in the Torah are taught to you by your mother. And so it said these 7 prophetesses teach you as a little child when you first arrive. And so in Matthew 18:1, it says, at that time, the disciples came to Yeshua and said, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called a child to himself and set him before them and said, truly, I say to you, unless you are converted, converted means to turn back, to turn around and become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And in the Hebraic way of understanding things, he doesn't mean like we would take it as, oh, now this little child is the greatest. It means he's on an equal footing with everyone else. And then Paul clarifies something for us. In Galatians 4:1, he says, now I say, as long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, a servant, although he is owner of everything. So you have 2 people who are treated exactly the same. You have the servant who has no hope of an inheritance, and you have the child who already owns everything. Excuse me. He just hasn't inherited it yet. And so they both go through this same training of learning how to function in a household. When we look at this individual immersion into Messiah, or even a national immersion into Messiah, it's showing us this growth principle of how we have to reset as a believer to this child slave condition that Paul is talking about. Each new cycle, each new growth cycle, each year as we go through these feasts, we reset. And so even though we're like the servant, we're preparing as a child to inherit the kingdom. And there's no other way to enter it. You can't walk into the kingdom, hold up your resume and say, I already know how to do this stuff. No, you humble yourself as a little child, and that's how you enter in. And this water tunnel of the Reed Sea, it was like a womb, like a mother's womb. They were walking through this Sallyport. And as they emerge, they come up a kingdom of newborns. No matter how old they were when they went into the water, they were all newborns when they came out of the water. So they had to humble themselves like the youngest child that went in. And so this child learns humility because he's treated like a slave. He's not mistreated, but he doesn't have anything yet. He's not inherited yet, even though the child knows, I already have everything. I already have my Father's kingdom. But I work like a servant in my Father's house right now because I'm learning about his kingdom. And that's the difference between a slave and a child. A slave works because of the oppression in his past. The child works based on what's in the future. And in that sense, this is why we talked about the Egyptian sticking chickens last week. Those little Egyptian sticking chickens, you get into a little bit of trouble, they'll pop up and start following you around. First hint of trouble, you'll revert to the sticking chickens. You'll start thinking like an Egyptian, like you're still a slave in Egypt. Because you're still in the past. And somehow you don't have hope of a future. You've not come up out of the water yet. But see, when this child comes up out of the water as a newborn, there's a humility there that says, you know what? Let me wash my garments in the word, because I know I'm going to inherit this kingdom. I might have made a mistake right here. I might have got myself in some trouble right here, difficult situation, but I know I'm going to inherit this kingdom. And in that sense, there is no least or greatest. All are children. We all begin as little children. And we need some time to experience that spiritual childhood. It's just pure joy of being with Yeshua. There's a lack of responsibility there. There's a lot of precocious children out there. It doesn't mean they're ready for the keys to the kingdom. Sometimes we can be a little too precocious. We think we're ready for the keys to the kingdom, but we never learned how to serve with the humility of a slave. But the word will train us like little children for our inheritance, because eventually that little child will grow up and will be responsible for going out and coming in to a restored garden. And a sinful person cannot dwell in that garden. And who knows, you might be one of those that has to escort visitors into the holy city and supervise them, make sure they don't get themselves in trouble. In 1 Kings 3:7, I believe this is Melech Shlomo. He says, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Yet I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in." We have to learn how to go out and come in. Even as wise as Solomon was, he had to learn how to go out and come in. So let's go back to what Yeshua said. Unless you become like a little child, which is what Solomon did in that moment, in that prayer, he says, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Enter, there in the Greek is Strong's 1525, but its cognate in Hebrew is bo, which you'll remember from the walking on water, when Yeshua said to Peter, bo. When Moses told the Israelites, bo, get in the water, come on, immerse, come in. And in the notes, it says it's to an assembly of persons. And it usually, and they put it in the context of going out and coming in, it says it usually denotes one's whole mode of living and acting. It's who you are. It's what you've been trained to do. It deals with an assembly of persons, your relationship to that assembly of persons, and who you are, your ability to go out and come in based on who you are, your whole mode of living and acting. So to be converted, to turn around like a little child, that has to be done before you can enter the kingdom of heaven. If you're going to learn the skills of going out and coming in through that Sallyport yourself, much less escort visitors into and out of the holy city, you have to be immersed into Messiah. You have to be immersed in the living word. Just like Israel, it says they were immersed into Moses, this great Torah teacher, 1 Corinthians 10, 1-2. It says, I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. All were immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And Moses says, there's going to be a prophet like me. You have to listen to him. If you couldn't enter the kingdom without listening to Moses, you're not going to be able to enter the kingdom without listening to Yeshua and accepting his sacrifice, your salvation, putting on that clean wedding garment. See, just putting on that wedding garment of salvation in Yeshua, that really just gets you as far as guest, visitor batch. It doesn't mean you're qualified to go out and come in and lead people. Be responsible for them. If you can't even be responsible for yourself and your own salvation, how are you going to be responsible for someone else? To know if it would actually be detrimental for them to come into that holy city, thinking like they're thinking, not knowing what they don't know. You have to make sure that bringing them in through that Sallyport is not going to be the death of them. You have to prepare them. And so, yes, Yeshua wants us to all come in like a little child. Turn back to him. And there's nothing wrong with just going back to Yeshua today and saying, Yeshua, I'm just making myself a little kid. I just want you to bless me. I'm not asking anything of you. You might have a laundry list this long of things you need Yeshua to do for you, but take some time, because sometimes kids don't really want anything from you. They just want to be with you. It's a blessing for them to be in your presence. And just say, Yeshua, I just want to be with you. And I want you to bless my growth process. I want to serve you like a servant. I know I already, it's all mine because it's yours. But show me how to serve you like a servant. And when trouble crops up, I don't want those Egyptian sticking chickens. I don't want to start looking back at the way it was before I knew you and think that somehow that was better. Those sins that I did before I met you, I don't want to go back to them. That's the way a slave thinks. Their mind will automatically go to what it was like to be a slave in Pharaoh's Egypt. But when trouble comes, I want my mind to automatically go to the way it will be in your kingdom. I know there's an inheritance waiting for me. Who I was on the other side of that water. Who I am now is your child. I want to convert. I want to turn around. I can see I'm on the wrong path here. I want to turn around and come back to you like a little child. And here's the irony. It's the exact opposite of a prison. Working in a prison, most people see a prison as a horrible place to be in because there's no freedom. Somebody else tells you when to get up, when to go to bed, where you're going to go to bed, where you're going to work, when you're going to eat, what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, when you're going to do your laundry, when you can go to the doctor, when you can't go to the doctor, when you can go to recreation, when you can't go to recreation, how much money you're going to make. Are you going to make 12 cents an hour? Are you going to make 17 cents an hour? Somebody else has complete control in that prison. When we go through this Sallyport, it's just the opposite. That Sallyport is a Sallyport to freedom. Freedom because now we're trained. And not only are we trained, we can train others. He gives us this freedom of movement. He says, yes, you're a full-time employee. You know how to conduct yourself. And not only do you know how to conduct yourself, you know how to keep others safe. You're not using your freedom as an occasion to sin, but you're using your freedom like a child who is growing into their inheritance. And when you're a full-time employee of this warden, he's going to give you the freedom to move in places that most of the world is not dressed to walk. He's giving you freedom to walk in a place that's completely free of sin. Jerusalem is a holy city. It is a place for those completely free of sin. If there's still a sin problem, you're not prepared to go out and come in. But what he's offering us is if we will train with the mindset of a little child, a servant, is eventually we'll go in and out of that Sallyport with complete confidence, complete competence, and we can have the joy of guiding that visitor into the presence of Adonai in the temple. I tell you what, one reason I like taking tours to Israel is, especially with people who have never been there before, have never been to Jerusalem before, have never been to the Kotel before, there's something that happens that really makes it worth all the work that you have to go through to not just put a tour together, but to make sure everybody's safe on the tour. There's kind of a windy way of getting to the Kotel. As you're going through the old city, you have to kind of know where to turn here and turn there, and it can get narrow. And if you've never been there before, you're kind of like that repairman going into the prison for the first time. You're just leading me around and I don't know where I'm going. But the closer we get to the Temple Mount, even though you can't just look around and know where you are, you can start to see a change on their faces. And that's why, like, sometimes you have to be ahead to show people where to go. But if somebody else can get ahead at that point, I like to just hang back so I can watch their faces. Because even though they're about to lay eyes on something for the first time in their natural lives, something starts to change before they even see it. They sense it. They sense the holiness. Even in this raggedy generation, talk about Egypt as a broken reed. The Western world is a broken reed, okay? But even with all that's wrong, even within the land itself, they sense the holiness of that place. And you can see a transformation. Like they know there's a quietness that just kind of comes over you. And then when you make that last turn there, and you know what I'm talking about, as you come out and then the steps go down into the plaza there at the Kotel. From that point, to see just the change in their countenance when they realize where they are. Not even up on the Temple Mount. Not even with the splendor and the glory of Yeshua's kingdom. But just in this raggedy generation, crying out for Messiah, with all the things wrong with it, they know they're in the right place. He has not abandoned his holy mountain. He's always watching over it. And if he's always watching over it, that's one place you're assured he's watching you. Not that there's anywhere you could go to get away from him, but you know 100% when you approach his holy mountain, his eyes are on you too. Because he knows you're trying to get close, like a little child. Let me get as close as I can and get a blessing. And some of the people that will go up there and put a prayer on the wall, you're like, dirty clothes. But there's something inside of them. They might be wearing a visitor badge, but the fact that they're here And they're coming to this wall and they're putting a prayer just in a retaining wall, not even up on the top, just putting a prayer in the retaining wall. There's something inside of that person that wants to come up out of the hedges. And when you take tourists in there, they're there on purpose. They spend a lot of money to get from where they were to get to where they are. And you can see the purest of joy. Imagine the millennium and why we're preparing to go out and to come in to the holy city when there will be lots of people left on earth who can't just come in and go out at will. They're going to need an escort. They're going to need preparation. They're going to need training. They're going to have to know how to maintain that garment of salvation and keep it clean so that they don't have a difficult time. Well, so that they can even make it past the gate. You know, a gate really is it's a Sallyport. And so we will be keeping the gates, the 12 tribes, as they do, they guard the 12 gates. And so I know all the great songs talk about just going boldly into the throne room and we just romp around like little, yeah. You have to come as a little child. But that means without sin. You have to know how to prepare yourself through salvation and how immersing and washing those garments of salvation is important. Keeping your garments is important. And that's where we come in. If we can help educate, prepare, vet, teach, check the inventory. What are you trying to take up on? What are you trying to carry into Jerusalem? Let me see what you got in that bag. Let's make sure it's not unclean because all the unclean stuff is way out there. We don't want them to bind you hand and foot and throw you out there. We want you to have a glorious experience. We want you to stand in the joy, the pure joy of your salvation. And to be part of that, it's kind of like, you know, when I taught high school for 7 years, when a kid finally gets it, when you've seen them struggle with something and they finally get it, and that look comes over their face like, yeah, that's it. You as the teacher share in that moment. And that's what Yeshua is offering us as his employees. The opportunity to share in a countless number of moments, helping people to go out and to come in his kingdom. And having the ability not just to abide ourselves in his presence, but to be that coach, that mentor, like Moses, like Joshua. Yeshua, he went out and came in whenever he wanted to. You ever notice that? He just could disappear on you in a second. Where'd he go? He knew how to go out and come in, and he says, you know the way I'm going. You know, was it Thomas? No, maybe it was Philip. One of them asked, like, how can we know where you're going? He's like, you know where I'm going. You just can't do it yet, but we will. We will. I want to go out and come in. I want to be useful in his kingdom. I don't want to be a visitor. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me. As far as I know, we should have the live stream next Shabbat. I remembered this week to put the link into the newsletter. So, Baruch Hashem, I remembered something. If you're online and you're in the Tuesday class, tell people we will not have the Tuesday class on Tuesday this week. I've got a doctor appointment I've got to do. What I'm thinking about doing at this point is possibly moving it also to Monday so that we would have like the Monday night class still, but then we would just move it from the Tuesday class from 11:30 on Tuesday to 11:30 on Monday. But it will be in your invitations when I send those out to you. Whatever I decide between now and tomorrow, it will be on those invitations. But if there's somebody you know who doesn't check their email that regularly, they just kind of click on the Zoom link, the old Zoom link, remind them that this is the way that I have that appointment. And so we will need to move the Tuesday class again. This week, we didn't have it because of our anniversary. And we just did a little relaxing trip down to Ocean Springs and had some really good food at Phoenicia. We went to Phoenicia and we found this quaint little flower shop with the most beautiful terracotta flower pots, which I love. And Alan put up with it. So that's how I know he still loves me. Any man that'll take you to the flower shop and load your flower pots for you, it is still good. It's still good. So yeah, just kind of, if you're in that Tuesday class, just kind of spread the word on that. And then we've got Revive, I think, coming up pretty soon that might affect, I know it'll affect the live stream, but we'll get that information to you and we'll always put it in the newsletter. All right, so I'll let you get back to your swimming or whatever it was you were doing and let you think about the Sallyport and how fun it is to be in the Sallyport where you can't go forward and you can't go back until somebody pops the door. It's a unique experience. All right, love you guys. B'ezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week.